A simple request for a meal at 30,000 feet, a dismissive no fueled by prejudice. They thought she was just another passenger they could ignore. They had no idea they weren't just disrespecting a customer, they were insulting the very architect of their success. They didn't know that Dr. Vivienne Dubois held their entire multi-billion-dollar industry in the palm of her hand. This isn't just a story about bad service. It's about how one woman's quiet dignity, when challenged, unleashed a corporate cataclysm that sent shockwaves from the boardroom to the baggage claim. And the most satisfying part, it's a chilling tale of how karma cashed the check in the most spectacular way imaginable. The world of Dr. Vivienne Dubois was one of precise calculations and elegant solutions. By the age of 38, she had carved out a space for herself in a world that rarely made room chemical engineering at its most innovative frontier. Her company, a boutique but formidable firm named Innovate Sustenance, was the silent giant behind a revolution in food logistics. Vivienne herself was the inventor and patent holder of a process she'd christened NeutriLock, a bio-organic film and atmospheric regulation system that could keep gourmet food fresh with its texture and flavor profile perfectly intact for up to 72 hours without freezing or harsh chemical preservatives. It was in short magic. And it was a magic that had made premium long-haul airline catering not just possible, but extraordinarily profitable. On this particular Tuesday, Vivienne was in seat 2A of a transatlantic flight from New York's JFK to London Heathrow. It was a well-deserved break, a trip to attend a conference, less as a presenter and more as a celebrated guest, followed by a week of exploring London's art galleries. She was dressed in tailored dark-wash jeans, a simple cashmere sweater, and comfortable but stylish loafers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, intricate braid that spoke of patience and precision, much like her work. She was unassuming, projecting an aura of calm intelligence rather than overt wealth. In the rarefied air of first class, where pinstripes and power suits were the norm, she was an island of quiet composure. She settled into the plush leather of her pod, the gentle hum of the Boeing 777, a familiar lullaby. She had spent the last 72 hours closing a grueling but successful licensing expansion with a Japanese consortium, and the fatigue was setting deep into her bones. All she wanted was the simple, predictable comfort that a first-class ticket was meant to guarantee a glass of champagne, a good meal, and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. The lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin introduced herself as Heather. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a helmet of blonde hair that seemed lacquered into place, and a smile that didn't quite reach her pale blue eyes. She moved through the cabin with a practiced, almost brittle efficiency, her attention lingering on the suited businessman in 1A and the bejeweled older woman across the aisle in 2D. When she got to Vivienne, the smile tightened, becoming a mere formality. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff, Mum?" Heather's voice was clipped. "A glass of champagne would be lovely, thank you," Vivienne replied, her tone warm and polite. Heather nodded curtly and moved on. The man in 1A received his scotch with a friendly chat about his destination. The woman in 2D got her Chardonnay with a fawning compliment on her bracelet. Vivienne received her champagne with a silent placement on her coaster, Heather's back already turned as she did so. Vivienne noted the slight. It was a familiar sting, a subtle atmospheric shift she had been navigating her entire life. It was the othering, the quiet, almost imperceptible questioning of her presence in spaces like this. She'd felt it in university lecture halls, in corporate boardrooms, and now in a first-class cabin she had more than earned the right to be in. She took a slow sip of her champagne, the crisp bubbles a small fleeting pleasure. She refused to let it bother her. Petty slights were beneath her attention. Her focus was on the bigger picture, the complex equations of her work, the elegant architecture of a well-negotiated contract. Heather, she decided, was just a minor variable in a long and otherwise successful equation, an insignificant rounding error. As the plane climbed to its cruising altitude, the soft glow of the cabin lights created a tranquil cocoon. The captain's voice announced a smooth flight ahead, and the scent of the first course began to waft from the galley. Vivian perused the menu, a document designed by a celebrity chef she knew had consulted with her own firm to ensure the food would travel well. The main course options were pan-seared halibut with a lemon dill reduction, a filet mignon with truffle sauce, or a wild mushroom risotto. Vivian's mouth watered at the thought of the halibut. It was a light, flavorful dish, perfect for a late-night flight. She closed her eyes, imagining the taste a small reward for a week of relentless work. The soft clinking of cutlery and plates grew nearer. Her quiet ascent into the clouds felt peaceful, a well-deserved respite. She had no idea that the calm was about to break and that a storm was gathering, not outside the plane, but right inside the climate-controlled quiet of the first-class cabin. The meal service began with the choreographed precision of a ballet. Heather and a younger flight attendant, a man named Paul, moved with practiced grace. Paul, who seemed genuinely pleasant, took the orders from the first row, his tone deferential and warm. When Heather arrived at Vivian's seat, the perfunctory smile was back in place. "And for your main course?" she asked, her pen hovering over her notepad, her eyes scanning somewhere over Vivian's shoulder. "I'll have the pan-seared halibut, please," Vivian said clearly. Heather's pen stopped. She looked directly at Vivian for the first time, and her pale blue eyes held a flat, dismissive quality. "I'm afraid we're out of the halibut." The statement was delivered with a note of finality that felt rehearsed. Vivian felt a flicker of disappointment, but kept her voice even. "Oh, that's a shame. In that case, the filet mignon, please. Medium rare." Heather gave a small, tight shake of her head. "The fillets are all spoken for as well. We only have the risotto." Vivian frowned slightly. It was unusual for 2 of the 3 main courses to be unavailable, especially for a passenger in the second row. First-class cabins were typically overstocked to ensure every passenger received their first choice. She had helped design the logistics for this very airline. She knew their provisioning protocols. An overage of 20% was standard. "You're out of both the fish and the beef?" She asked, a hint of inquiry, not accusation, in her voice. "That's surprising." "It's been a very popular menu," Heather replied, her voice cooling by several degrees. The subtext was clear. "Don't question me." "So, will it be the risotto?" Vivian glanced across the aisle. The woman in 2D who had ordered after her was now chatting with Paul. Vivian couldn't hear the entire exchange, but she clearly heard the woman say, "And the halibut sounds divine, I'll have that." Paul smiled and nodded, jotting it down without a moment's hesitation. A cold knot formed in Vivian's stomach. This was no longer a subtle slight or a potential misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Heather was lying to her face. Vivian held Heather's gaze. The woman across the aisle just ordered the halibut. Heather's expression didn't flinch. It hardened. "She had a pre-order, ma'am. It was reserved." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it was almost impressive. Pre-orders were flagged on the passenger manifest, and the ordering process was different. Paul had taken the woman's order just moments ago, the same as everyone else. Heather was counting on Vivian, not knowing the procedure or being too timid to challenge the lie. "I see," Vivian said, her voice now losing its warmth, becoming as precise and cold as a surgical instrument. Then perhaps you can show me on your manifest where it indicates her pre-order, because I happen to know that on-the-spot orders are fulfilled on a first-come, first-served basis, starting from row 1. And I ordered before her. Heather's composure finally cracked. A faint pink flush crept up her neck. The mask of customer service fell away, revealing the ugly sneer beneath. We don't have to show passengers our manifest. The halibut is not available for you. You can have the mushroom risotto, or you can have the salad from the appetizer course. It's your choice. The words, "for you," hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was the final, undeniable confirmation. The issue wasn't the availability of the food. It was the identity of the person ordering it. Vivian, the calm, unassuming black woman in 2A, was being denied the same service afforded to the white passengers around her. The humiliation was a hot, sharp poker to the chest. Every head in the small cabin was now turned, conversations silenced. The businessman in 1A looked uncomfortable, quickly turning his gaze to the window. The woman in 2D stared openly, a look of mild, curious disdain on her face. Paul, the other flight attendant, stood frozen near the galley, his eyes wide. Vivian took a slow, deep breath, forcing the initial surge of anger down. Lashing out would accomplish nothing. It would only feed the narrative Heather was likely already constructing in her head, the angry black woman. Vivian's power wasn't in volume, it was in precision. "Very well," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I find I've lost my appetite." She picked up the in-flight magazine, her hands perfectly steady, and opened it to a random page, her eyes not registering a single word. She would not eat the risotto. She would not give Heather the satisfaction of forcing a choice upon her. She would sit there in the sphere of her purchased luxury and be denied its most basic components. The silence in the cabin was heavy. Heather, looking flustered but defiant, finally turned and walked stiffly back to the galley. A few minutes later, the clinking of cutlery resumed, but the atmosphere was forever changed. The scent of seared halibut wafted from the seat across the aisle, a fragrant, mocking testament to the lie. Vivian stared at the glossy page of the magazine, but all she could see was the cold, calculated ugliness in Heather's eyes. The slight was no longer a rounding error. It was a declaration of war. And Vivian Dubois had never ever lost a war. Vivian waited. She let the meal service proceed a silent observer in her own Apman. She watched as the woman in 2D was served her perfectly cooked halibut. She watched as the businessman in 1A enjoyed his filet mignon. She watched as Heather moved through the cabin, her earlier fluster replaced by a rigid, self-righteous confidence, pointedly avoiding eye contact with seat 2A. The injustice of it all settled not as a hot rage, but as a cold, dense certainty in her core. This would not stand. When Paul came to clear the other passengers' plates, he approached her pod with a look of genuine apology in his young eyes. "Dr. Dubois," he said, his voice low, "can I get you anything at all? A cheese plate, dessert, anything?" "Thank you, Paul. That's kind of you," Vivian replied, appreciating his small gesture of humanity. "But I'd like to speak with the flight purser, please." Paul nodded immediately. "Of course, I'll get him for you right away." A few minutes later, a man named Gregory the purser arrived. He was in his 50s with a weary air and the practiced, placating smile of a man who had diffused 1,000 passenger complaints. Heather stood just behind his shoulder, her arms crossed, a silent and challenging presence. "Dr. Dubois," Gregory began, his voice smooth. "I understand there was some confusion regarding your meal choice." "There was no confusion, Gregory," Vivian stated, her voice calm and level. "There was a denial of service. I was told that 2 of the 3 main courses were unavailable. I was told this was due to them being spoken for, yet the passenger across the aisle, who ordered after me, received one of those supposedly unavailable meals. Your flight attendant, Heather, then lied about a pre-order, before finally admitting the meal was not available for me. I'd like an explanation. Gregory's smile faltered for a second. He glanced back at Heather, who whispered something in his ear. Her expression was one of a victimized employee who had been forced to deal with a difficult passenger. Gregory turned back to Vivian, his expression shifting from placating to defensive. Well, Dr. Dubois Heather informs me that you became quite aggressive when she was simply trying to explain a stocking issue. We did have a last-minute catering error at JFK, and manifests were not updated correctly. Heather was doing her best under pressure. Sometimes passengers can misinterpret a tone when our staff is busy. Vivian felt a surge of disbelief. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were twisting the events, painting her as the aggressor and Heather as the beleaguered professional. They were building their wall brick by disingenuous brick. I was not aggressive, Vivian said, her enunciation becoming sharper, more deliberate. I was precise. And the catering error story is a new one. A moment ago, it was a lie about a pre-order. The narrative seems to be fluid. So let me be perfectly clear. I am a first-class passenger who was denied service based on what I can only conclude is racial bias. I am asking you, as the purser in charge of this cabin, to rectify the situation. Rectify it. How? Gregory asked, his tone now bordering on hostile. The meal service is over. Heather has already noted in her flight report that you were disruptive. The flight report, the official record, the lie was being cemented into the airline's history. Vivian was now officially documented as a disruptive passenger. It was a classic, insidious tactic. Then I need to speak to the captain. Vivian said, her patience stretched to its absolute limit. I want him to be aware that a member of his crew is creating a discriminatory and hostile environment for a passenger. Gregory sighed dramatically, as if Vivian were a petulant child demanding the impossible. The captain is very busy flying the plane. I am not going to disturb him over a complaint about a meal. This is not about a meal anymore, Gregory, Vivian said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than any shout. This is about a pattern of discriminatory behavior, falsified excuses, and now a slanderous entry into an official report. If you will not get the captain, you leave me no other choice. Heather smirked from behind Gregory's shoulder, a flash of triumphant venom in her eyes. She believed she had won. She and Gregory had closed ranks, presenting an unbreakable wall of crew solidarity against a lone passenger they had already branded a troublemaker. They thought the matter was closed. Your choice is to enjoy the rest of your flight quietly, Dr. Dubois. Gregory said, his voice now cold and authoritative. Or we can discuss the consequences of continued disruption when we land at Heathrow. It was a threat. A clear, unambiguous threat. Vivian looked from his stern, dismissive face to Heather's smug expression. She had presented her case calmly and logically. She had appealed to the chain of command, and at every turn she had been met with lies, deflection, and intimidation. The wall was not just unbreakable, it was designed to crush anyone who pushed against it. I understand, Vivian said softly. She leaned back in her seat, breaking eye contact. She picked up her phone. Gregory and Heather exchanged a look of victory. They saw her retreat as surrender. They thought they had successfully put the difficult woman in her place. They turned and walked away, their backs, straight, their mission accomplished. They had no idea that Vivian wasn't surrendering. She was reloading. The wall they had built was about to be hit by a wrecking ball they couldn't see, hear or comprehend. She wasn't a troublemaker they needed to manage. She was the architect of the very ground they stood on, and they had just handed her the demolition codes. Vivian didn't make a sound. There was no huff of indignation, no muttered curse. As Gregory and Heather retreated in their shared bubble of misguided victory, she simply activated her phone. The small icon indicating a successful connection to the plane's satellite Wi-Fi glowed on her screen. The service was expensive and often slow, a luxury most passengers used for sending a few emails or browse social media. For Vivian, it was about to become the most cost-effective weapon she had ever deployed. She didn't open a social media app to vent. She didn't text a friend to complain. She opened a secure, encrypted messaging application and began a new communication. Her fingers moved with a calm, deliberate speed across the keyboard. She wasn't writing out of anger, but with the cold, focused precision of a scientist setting up a critical experiment. The recipient was David Chen, the COO of Innovate Sustenance, and her most trusted colleague. The message was short and devoid of emotion. Subject urgent. Covenant Breach Protocol. David Initiate. Covenant Breach Protocol. Severity Alpha against Aero Cuisine Global, effective immediately. Client Global Skyways Flight, GS742, JFK LHR. Cause material breach of service standards and discriminatory conduct by client personnel, leading to a direct violation of the Brand Integrity Clause, Sectase 4 Sub and C, in our Master Licensing Agreement. Issue formal notice of immediate license suspension for patent US 11 284. 521B2 NeutriLock system. All access to patented materials, methods, and support systems is to be terminated as of 0100 GMT. Notify their General Counsel and CEO Harrison Thorne. No further details required in the initial notice. They know what this means. Vivian, she hit send. The message vanished into the digital ether, arcing up to a satellite and back down to an office in Boston. To an outsider, it would have seemed like an anticlimactic response to such profound disrespect. But Vivian knew the cataclysmic power of the words she had just typed. Aero Cuisine Global wasn't just another catering company. They were the largest airline food logistics provider in the world, serving over 30 international carriers, including Global Skyways, the airline she was currently on. And the heart of their entire premium service operation, the very thing that allowed them to offer chef-designed fresh meals on long-haul flights, was the NeutriLock system. Vivian hadn't just licensed her technology to them. She had woven it into the very fabric of their business. The Brand Integrity Clause was her personal insertion into every contract. It stipulated that any company using her technology had to maintain the highest standards of service and professional conduct. It was designed as a safeguard to ensure the premium quality associated with NeutriLock was never tarnished. Crucially, it gave Innovate Sustenance the unilateral right to immediately suspend the license if a Severity Alpha breach defined as an act of discrimination, illegality, or gross negligence by the client or its agents was confirmed by a company officer. As the CEO and founder, Vivian was that officer. She had just pulled the pin from a grenade and rolled it into the boardroom of a $10 billion company. The suspension wasn't just a legal threat, it was a technical shutdown. The bioorganic film was a proprietary compound mixed at Aero Cuisine's kitchens using a concentrate supplied by Innovate Sustenance. The atmospheric regulation units in their transport pods and onboard galley ovens were networked. They required a constantly updated digital handshake key from Innovate Sustenance servers to function. Without that key, they were just insulated boxes. At precisely 0100 Greenwich Mean Time, every single NeutriLock system licensed to Aero Cuisine Global in every airport kitchen from Los Angeles to Dubai would cease to function. The concentrates would be rendered inert. The transport pods would unlock and refuse to reseal. The special galley ovens on hundreds of aircraft would flash a single error message, "License invalid." Vivian closed her phone and placed it face down. She took a sip of water. A profound, almost serene calm washed over her. She had been insulted and dismissed. They had tried to make her feel small and powerless. So she had responded, not by raising her voice, but by quietly and systematically dismantling the very foundation of their business. Heather walked by again, collecting a stray glass. She shot Vivian a look that was pure, triumphant condescension. It was the look of someone who believes they have crushed a minor annoyance. Vivian met her gaze for a brief moment, her expression unreadable. In that moment, Heather saw nothing. She had no inkling that the woman in seat 2A had just made a single call, a single digital command that would not only end her career, but would bring her employer and a significant portion of the global airline industry to a grinding, chaotic halt. The real karma wasn't going to be a letter of complaint. It was going to be the complete and utter unraveling of an empire, all before the plane even touched down in London. Harrison Thorne, CEO of Aero Cuisine Global, was asleep in his sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. His phone, set to bypass all but the most critical alerts, buzzed violently on his marble nightstand. He swatted at it, annoyed. It buzzed again, insistent. With a groan, he finally grabbed it, his eyes squinting at the screen. It was a Severity 1 alert from his general counsel, sent at what was 9:05 p.m. Eastern Time. The subject line was a jolt of pure adrenaline, urgent immediate license suspension, innovate sustenance. Harrison sat bolt upright in bed, his sleep fog vanishing instantly. Innovate sustenance, Vivian Dubois. This had to be a mistake, a system glitch. They were his golden goose. The NeutriLock patent was the bedrock of his company's valuation. Without it, they were just another glorified sandwich maker. He speed-dialed his general counsel, a perpetually stressed man named Robert. "What the hell is this?" "Robert," Harrison barked, forgoing any greeting. "Is this a joke?" "I wish it were Harrison." Robert's voice was strained, panicked. "We received a formal notice 9 minutes ago. It's real. They've invoked the brand integrity clause and suspended our license for the NeutriLock system. Effective in 50 minutes at 0100 GMT. On what grounds?" Harrison roared, pacing his bedroom. "We just paid them 8 figures for the last quarter's licensing fee. We have a flawless record." The notice cited a Severity Alpha AGIS breach, discriminatory conduct by client personnel. It references a global Skyways flight, GS742, JFK to Heathrow. That's all it says. Harrison's mind raced. Flight 742. It was in the air right now. Discriminatory conduct. What does that even mean? One of our drivers made an off-color joke. This is insane. Get Dubois on the phone. Now. We've tried. Robert said, his voice cracking slightly. All calls are being routed to her COO, David Chen. He's stonewalling. He says the decision is final and irreversible until Dr. Dubois herself says otherwise. And she's unreachable. What do you mean, unreachable? Find her. We think she's on flight 742, Harrison. The blood drained from Harrison's face. The accuser, the judge, and the jury was on the very flight where the supposed incident occurred. A sick feeling began to pool in his stomach. This wasn't a glitch. This was personal. This was targeted. He hung up and immediately called his director of operations for the North American East Coast. The line was busy. He tried again. Busy. He called the head of European operations. Busy. Then the first reports started flooding his executive channels. A frantic message from the operations manager at JFK. Sir, the NeutriLock pods for the morning's Asia-bound flights just unlocked. All of them. The food for 6 flights is exposed. We can't reseal them. The system is showing a license invalid error. Another from Frankfurt. All galley ovens on incoming transatlantic flights are failing. We have pilots from Global Skyways, from Lufthansa, from Air France, all reporting the same error code on their catering equipment. They can't heat the first and business class meals. The chaos was cascading. At 0100 GMT, as if a switch had been flipped, the technological heart of Aero Cuisine Global had a massive system-wide coronary. Kitchens in 27 airports on 4 continents ground to a halt. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gourmet food, meticulously prepared, was now sitting useless in pods that refused to lock its shelf life, ticking down from hours to minutes. The phones at Aero Cuisine's corporate headquarters began to light up like a Christmas tree in hell. Furious airline executives were on the line demanding answers. How could their premium cabins for the next 24 hours have no premium meals? It was a logistical nightmare and a public relations disaster of epic proportions. Their most valuable customers were about to be served cold snacks and a weak apology. Harrison Thorne, dressed in a silk robe, stood in his glass-walled penthouse, looking down at the glittering, uncaring lights of New York City. His multi-billion-dollar empire was unraveling in real time, brought to its knees by a single unseen event on a single airplane. The stock he knew would be a bloodbath when the market opened. "Get me the flight report from GS742, he yelled at his assistant over the phone. "And get me the passenger manifest. I want to know everything that happened in that first-class cabin. Everything." Minutes later, the documents arrived in his inbox. He scanned the manifest first, and there it was. Seat 2A, Dubois Vivian. Then he opened the purser's report. It was brief. It mentioned a minor passenger complaint regarding meal service. It described the passenger in 2A Dr. Dubois as becoming disruptive and aggressive. The complaint was handled by flight attendant Heather Miller and purser Gregory Finch, who resolved the situation by de-escalating. Harrison stared at the words, a cold dread creeping up his spine. De-escalating disruptive. They hadn't de-escalated anything. They had lit the fuse. Some arrogant, power-tripping flight attendant and her equally clueless purser had insulted the one woman on Earth who could single-handedly cripple his entire company. They hadn't just denied a passenger a piece of fish. They had, through their ignorance and prejudice, executed the most expensive act of corporate sabotage in aviation history. He looked at the manifest again. Heather Miller, Gregory Finch. He committed the names to memory. Then he looked at his phone at the stock ticker app he had open. Even in after-hours trading, the panic was beginning. Aero Cuisine Global ACG was already down 15%. The scale of the catastrophe was dawning on him. This wasn't about a contract anymore. It was about survival. He had to find Vivian Dubois. He had to get to London. And he had to beg. The descent into London was smooth, while an entire corporate empire convulsed on the ground below the cabin of Flight 742 remained an oasis of ignorant calm. Heather Miller went about her duties preparing the cabin for landing a spring in her step. She felt vindicated, believing she had expertly handled a difficult passenger and reasserted her authority. She was already mentally composing the follow-up email she would send to her supervisor, praising Gregory's support and highlighting her own professionalism under pressure. Vivian watched her from her seat, a silent, impassive observer. She felt no glee, no triumphant surge of schadenfreude. What she felt was a profound sense of weary disappointment. Disappointment that it had come to this. That the only way to be heard, the only way to correct a deep and personal injustice, was to trigger a corporate earthquake. As the plane taxied to the gate at Heathrow Terminal 5, Vivian gathered her small carry-on bag. She was one of the first to disembark. She moved through the jet bridge and into the bustling terminal, navigating the river of travelers with the same quiet efficiency she did everything else. She cleared passport control swiftly and headed towards the arrivals hall, planning to hail a black cab to take her to her hotel in Mayfair. Meanwhile, Harrison Thorne was in a state of controlled panic. He had chartered a private jet, the fastest he could get, and was currently halfway across the Atlantic, several hours behind Vivian. His team, however, was already on the ground in London. He had dispatched his UK regional director, a harried man named Nigel, with a single desperate instruction. Find Dr. Dubois. Do not be intrusive. Do not be aggressive. Treat her like she is the Queen of England, because as of right now, she is. Find out where she is staying, and wait for my arrival. Nigel, armed with a photograph of Vivian, and a team of discreet private agents, had staked out the arrivals area. When Vivian emerged looking exactly like her picture, unassuming, elegant, and composed, Nigel's heart leaped into his throat. This was her, the woman who held the fate of his career and his boss's company in her hands. He approached cautiously, his demeanor, a careful blend of extreme deference and British politeness. Dr. Dubois, Dr. Vivian Dubois. Vivian stopped and turned her eyes, showing mild surprise. Yes, Dr. Dubois, my name is Nigel Barrett. I'm the UK Director for Aero Cuisine Global. He practically winced as he said the company name. My CEO, Mr. Harrison Thorne, is en route from New York. He is desperate to have a word with you at your earliest convenience. He asked me to extend his most profound and sincere apologies for any aspect of your flight that was less than satisfactory. Vivian's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of understanding crossed her features. The first shockwave had made landfall. Mr. Barrett, she said, her voice even. I have a hotel reservation and a schedule to keep. I'm not sure I have time for a meeting. Please, Dr. Dubois. Nigel pleaded, his professionalism fraying into desperation. This is a matter of catastrophic importance. We have a problem with our systems. A global problem. We believe it originated with your flight. Mr. Thorne will move mountains to accommodate you. He will meet you anywhere, any time. He simply asks for 5 minutes of your time when he lands. He then added, We have arranged a car for you to take you wherever you need to go. Please allow us this small courtesy. Vivian considered him for a moment. She saw the genuine fear in his eyes. He was just an employee caught in the blast radius. Her fight wasn't with him. Fine, she said. Tell Mr. Thorne he can meet me at the Claridge's Hotel bar at 3 p.m., and I'll take my own cab, thank you. She turned and walked away, leaving Nigel standing there, both immensely relieved and utterly terrified. At precisely 3 p.m., Vivian was seated in a plush velvet armchair at the Claridge's bar, nursing a cup of tea. Harrison Thorne arrived looking disheveled and exhausted. He had come straight from the airport, his power suit rumpled his face, pale with stress and lack of sleep. This was not the swaggering titan of industry from magazine covers. This was a man on the brink of ruin. He approached her table, his hands clenched. Dr. Dubois, Harrison Thorne, thank you for seeing me. Mr. Thorne, Vivian said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. You wanted 5 minutes. He sat down, leaning forward, his voice a low, urgent plea. Dr. Dubois? Vivian, I don't even know where to begin. What happened on that flight was inexcusable. It was disgusting. It was a violation of every principle of decency, let alone customer service. The employees involved, they don't just represent a failure in training, they represent a cancer that I, as CEO, allowed to grow within my organization. He spoke for 10 minutes, not 5. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to downplay it. He explained the chaos she had unleashed, the grounded flights, the furious clients, the stock price that had plummeted 42% upon market open, wiping out nearly $4 billion in shareholder value. He explained that her single email had triggered an existential crisis for the company he had spent his life building. "I am not here to ask you to just flip the switch back on," he said, his voice raw. "I am here first and foremost to apologize, profoundly, and secondly, to ask you what I need to do to make this right. Not just for my company, but for you. What do you want?" Vivian listened, her expression unreadable. She let the silence hang in the air after he finished a silence, more unnerving than any tirade. She took a slow sip of her tea. Finally, she looked at him, her eyes sharp and clear. "What do I want, Mr. Thorne?" she asked softly. "I want you to understand that this was never about a piece of fish. It was about dignity. Your employee tried to strip me of mine because she didn't think I belonged there. She and her purser created a false narrative to protect their prejudice and threatened me when I challenged it. They assumed I was powerless." She leaned forward slightly. "You didn't have a catering error, Mr. Thorne. You have a culture problem, a cancer, as you so aptly put it. And you don't cure cancer with a bandage and a verbal apology." Harrison nodded, his face grim. "I know. So tell me. Tell me what the treatment is. I'll do anything." This was the moment. The humbling was complete. The Titan was begging. The power had shifted entirely from the boardroom to a quiet corner of a hotel bar. Vivian was about to present her terms, and she knew he would have no choice but to accept them, every single one. Vivian set her teacup down on its saucer. The delicate clink of porcelain on porcelain was the only sound in the opulent, hushed atmosphere of the Claridge's bar. For Harrison Thorne, it sounded like a gavel falling. He watched her, this woman, who held the smouldering remains of his empire in her hands, and waited for his sentence. He had come prepared to offer money, apologies, a groveling retraction. He was about to learn that her price was far higher and far more profound. "You say you'll do anything, Mr. Thorne." She began, her voice a quiet force that cut through his anxiety. "Let's test that theory. This isn't about revenge. Revenge is petty, a short-term satisfaction that solves nothing. This is about correction. Systemic, painful, and permanent correction." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "First, let's address the catalyst. Justice must be immediate, and it must be seen. Your client, Global Skyways, will terminate the employment of flight attendant Heather Miller and purser Gregory Finch. Not a suspension, not a transfer to a less desirable route. Termination. Effective today. Their official records will state without ambiguity that the cause was gross misconduct involving documented passenger discrimination. I want a digitally signed confirmation of this action from the CEO of Global Skyways, forwarded to my personal email, before you and I are finished here." Harrison's jaw tightened. Firing another company's employees was an overreach, but he knew he was in no position to argue. He pulled out his phone. "Give me one moment." He walked a few feet away, turning his back to her. Vivian could hear the muffled fury in his voice as he spoke to the CEO of the airline. "Paul, it's Harrison Thorne. I'm fine. Listen, you have 2 employees, a flight attendant, Heather Miller, and a purser, Gregory Finch. They were on GS 742 last night." "Yes, that flight. They cost my company over $4 billion in market value today. You have exactly 10 minutes to confirm to me via email that they are no longer employed by your airline for any reason, or by sunrise, you will need to find a new catering partner for your entire global fleet. I suggest you make the right choice." He snapped his phone shut and returned to the table, his face grim. "It's being handled." "I have no doubt," Vivian said, unimpressed. "That was the easy part. Now for the architecture of the solution. Second, your company, AeroCuisine Global, profited immensely from my intellect. Your premium service is built on my science. Yet your client's employees treated my person with contempt. There is a debt to be paid. You will establish and fund a new mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training protocol. I am not talking about the useless, click-through online module your HR department currently uses. This will be a rigorous, multi-day in-person workshop designed by a top-tier consultancy specializing in organizational psychology. I will select the firm. The curriculum will focus on identifying and dismantling unconscious bias, understanding the impact of microaggressions, and learning de-escalation techniques that empower and validate customers rather than gaslight and slander them. This program, which will be known internally as the Dubois Protocol, will be a mandatory certification for every single client-facing employee of AeroCuisine Global. Furthermore, you will amend your contracts to make it mandatory for every flight crew member of every airline you service. Your product is premium service. You will now ensure the humanity that delivers it is too. The sheer scale of this demand visibly staggered Harrison. The cost would be astronomical, the logistics a nightmare. It was an unprecedented level of operational intrusion. But he saw the unyielding resolve in her eyes. "Agreed," he managed to say the word, tasting like ash. "Third," she continued, her voice unwavering, "you have a cultural problem, a cancer, you called it. Curing it requires more than just prevention. It requires reparation. AeroCuisine Global will make an immediate 8-figure charitable donation. This donation will be the seed money for a foundation I have been planning to launch, the Dr. Vivian Dubois STEM Fellowship for Women of Color. Your company's failure of decency will now fuel the success of a generation of women who look like me. It will help ensure that in the future there are more of us in lecture halls, in laboratories, and yes, in first-class cabins. And they will be there not as anomalies to be questioned, but as architects of the world they occupy. My legal team will draft the endowment paperwork." Harrison simply nodded, the numbers flashing in his head. The donation was massive, but it was a rounding error compared to the value she was withholding. He felt a strange, grudging respect. She wasn't just punishing him. She was forcing his company to become an agent of the very change it had resisted. Fourth, accountability. Your complaint system is a sham. It's designed to protect your client's employees from liability, not to provide justice for passengers. It allowed a lie to be entered into an official record. That ends now. You will create at your expense a new independent internal affairs unit. Any passenger complaint that contains keywords related to discrimination, race, gender, religion, disability, will be automatically escalated to this unit, bypassing the usual chain of command entirely. The investigation will be swift, transparent, and its findings will be delivered in full to the complainant. This protocol will be drafted by my lawyers, approved by me, and implemented across your entire client network. She leaned back, her case made. And fifth, the fine print. Once these 4 conditions have been met, the contract signed, the funds transferred, and the confirmations received, all as legally binding addendums to our master licensing agreement, only then will I authorize David Chen to reinstate your license. Not a second before. And naturally, AeroCuisine Global will be covering all my legal fees associated with this renegotiation, along with my expenses at this hotel. She took a final slow sip of her tea. That is my price, Mr. Thorne. It is not negotiable. What followed was a maelstrom of corporate activity compressed into a few desperate hours. Harrison Thorne, operating out of a hastily acquired suite at the Claridge's, became a general commanding a war against his own company's inertia. Lawyers were roused from their beds in New York and London, tasked with drafting the most unusual and punitive contract addendums of their careers. The CFO was instructed to prepare a wire transfer so large it required special authorization, his stunned silence on the phone-speaking volumes. The email confirming the terminations of Heather Miller and Gregory Finch arrived cold and formal. A press release was painstakingly crafted, a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak that framed the impending changes not as a capitulation to a crisis, but as a bold, forward-thinking strategic partnership to redefine industry standards. By evening, a stack of digitally executed documents lay on Vivian's tablet. The funds were confirmed. The New World Order was codified in legal language. She reviewed everything with the same precision she would a chemical equation, found it balanced, and made her second communication of the day. A simple, secure text to David Chen. Terms met. Restore the ACG license. Across the globe, as if by magic, the digital heart of AeroCuisine Global began to beat again. In a kitchen in Singapore, a transport pod beeped and sealed shut. In a galley over the Pacific, an oven's error message vanished, replaced by the warm glow of its preheating cycle. Harrison Thorne slumped in his chair, received the first field report that the system was back online, and felt not joy, but the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had survived his own execution. The reckoning for the instigators was swift and brutal. Heather Miller discovered her fate when she tried to use her crew discount to buy perfume at a duty-free shop, only to have her card declined and her credentials flagged. A clipped, impersonal call from a stranger in HR informed her that her services were no longer required due to gross misconduct. Her attempts to find work at other major airlines were met with a silent, impenetrable wall. The legend of Flight 742, though stripped of its details, had made her unemployable. Gregory Finch, who thought his seniority would protect him, was called into a meeting where he was given no chance to speak. He was a casualty of a war he hadn't even known was being fought, his career, ending not with a bang, but with the quiet shame of choosing to protect a petty bigot over doing the right thing. Months later, on a flight from Chicago to Tokyo, a young flight attendant, freshly certified in the Dubois Protocol, noticed a businessman growing impatient with an elderly passenger who was struggling to stow her bag. Instead of admonishing either of them, the attendant approached with a warm smile, helped the woman with her bag, and then quietly offered the businessman a complimentary drink for his patience. It was a small gesture, a minor interaction, but it was proof. The system had been corrected. The culture was ever so slowly beginning to change. Vivian, reading about the success of her STEM Fellowship's first cohort, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had not just won. She had rebuilt. And that was a victory that would last. Vivian Dubois' story is a potent reminder that true strength isn't found in the loudest voice, but in the most resolute mind. It demonstrates how integrity, intelligence, and a refusal to accept injustice can dismantle prejudiced systems brick by brick, contract by contract. What began with the denial of a plate of food evolved into a revolution in corporate responsibility, proving that one person's dignity when defended can echo from a single airplane seat to boardrooms across the globe. This wasn't just karma, it was a masterclass in leveraging power for profound systemic change. If this story of poetic justice and the incredible power of one individual resonated with you, please honor Dr. Dubois' spirit by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs to be reminded that you should never ever underestimate a person's worth. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss our next story of real-life karma and extraordinary vindication.